Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper, CEO and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group. And I'm back for another exciting episode of HR, We Have a Problem. This is the show where we like to break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we talk about what you might do about them. So joining me today is Josh Merrill. Josh is the co-founder and CEO of Confirm. Josh has founded several other companies and is also an angel investor with what looks to be a focus on tech. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Teri.
Anything you want to add to that introduction?
The only other thing I might add is I previously spent 6 years at a company called Carta. I was the chief product officer there and got to scale the company from being the second employee to I left when it was maybe 500 or 600 and got to see all the pains of performance management from both sides of the table.
All right. Well, then this is going to be a good conversation. So you wrote an article, I think recently, maybe last month in SHRM about fixing performance reviews for good, right?
Yep.
And I wanted to talk about that in general. Obviously, that was a very interesting article, and we've got some other things to talk about here. But performance reviews and the whole process around performance is probably one of the most disliked HR functions, right?
Totally.
And we're constantly looking for better ways to improve the process. Not to mention that these are the things that these organizations rely heavily on to make their people decisions, whether you're going to get a promotion, whether you're going to end up on a performance improvement plan and or out the door. So I was hoping we could talk about what you're seeing in this space and how we can help our listeners fix their performance reviews. Does that sound like a good plan for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that performance reviews, we like to say they deserve a pip. There's a lot of stats around why performance reviews are broken and how little value people see in them. But I think that when we look at performance reviews, what I see is a 100-year-old practice. So I'm a huge history buff, so indulge me for a quick second here. So performance reviews are 100 years old. They came out of the US military after World War I, where they needed a way to decide which recruits were going to be promoted into the officer ranks. So they created this 1 through 5, this consistent scale that recruits were going to be evaluated by. And I've actually seen performance reviews that are 100 years old. And if I showed them to you today, you would look at them and go, oh, that's a performance review, right? That's how little this process has changed in 100 years. Now, of course, the way that we work has changed dramatically in the last 100 years. In fact, it's changed dramatically in the last 5 years because the way that we work is in networks. And what that really means is that if any typical employee, if you're a knowledge worker especially, you're probably using a tool like Microsoft Teams or Slack, which means that you can log in and direct message anybody in your organization. You have direct access. We're more cross-functional and collaborative than ever before. We use tools like Zoom and Google Meet and WebEx, and we meet cross-functionally from all over the world. So the way that we work has evolved dramatically, but the way that we measure that work has not.
Right.
That's still stuck in the past.
We're still evaluating them in the hierarchical structure, right? And not so much in this idea of networks, which I really like that concept. And I think it makes a lot of sense when you think about the way the people within the organization work and interact and achieve their goals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was in business school, they taught me to manage by walking around. Like, somebody show me how to do that on Zoom, please, right? Like, I can't be in every Slack channel, every Teams channel. The visibility of the manager has actually gone way, way down, even though the number of touch points of the average employee has actually exploded. Because in any typical day, you may interact with dozens of your coworkers. So much of that work is happening outside of the visibility of the manager. And yet we still have this system of advancement the system of decision making that relies on the manager having perfect information. And the reality is they just don't.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know that they ever will, but there's certainly a better set of information that they can have, right? So what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that these businesses face or managers face with respect to performance reviews in the process? And how do you and relate that back to some of the changes that have happened over the last 5 to 10 years with more regular check-ins and just the various ways we've tried to make performance reviews better, short of getting rid of ratings and bringing ratings back. I mean, there's just so many things that are happening and the pendulum just keeps swinging, but there's still a core set of challenges out there for businesses.
Totally. I'm getting whiplash from like the last 10 years of conversation in this space, because for the last decade, the conversation was about how to get away from doing performance reviews. And now we're in an economy that is possibly a little bit tighter, where we have to do more with less. And now performance reviews are back, and they're back with all the same problems. What was supposed to replace them was continuous feedback or individual development plans or skill-based development. The problem is that when you need to make decisions, like, who do I have one promotion open? I have 4 candidates, or God forbid, right? I've got to RIF 10% of my employees. What you need to be able to make those decisions is data, it's measurement. And continuous feedback, while it's great, it doesn't solve that problem. And so what we've turned to is the classical manager-driven performance review in a world where work just doesn't get done that way anymore. The best employees today, if you imagine work even 20 years ago, it was so much around somebody who could take instruction and then execute on it. It was the person who listened to the boss. These days, what we really reward is autonomy. The best employees are the ones who you can give a problem to. You may not know what the solution is, but you give them a problem and they go out and find the resources and they get it done. It's kind of like give somebody a problem and you say, hey, call me if you get stuck. I'll see you in a week. Right. And they come back and it's solved. That's what we actually reward. And what we know is happening in that week of time is this employee is working cross-functionally. They're working with people outside their team in other geographies. And so that's the way work actually gets done. And I would say that a really good performance management system would not only provide the employee with the feedback that they need to develop, but it would also give us really good measurement about what really is happening behind the scenes that the manager isn't always aware of.
Right. And so many of these people today, I mean, individuals are in matrix organizations where they don't just have a single manager that they report to, right? And so the one that's doing their performance review may or may not have a good window into the real work that's getting done on their plate. So, yeah, I mean, I was surprised. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was a little surprised by some of the numbers and some of the research that you had written about where managers underestimate employees' performance nearly half the time.
Yeah.
And that something like 60% of performance ratings from an academic study, academic research said that 60% of performance ratings can be attributed solely to just whatever the manager sort of thinks about you, right?
Yeah, it's called the idiosyncratic rater bias. And what that study in particular actually found was 60% of an employee's performance rating could be attributed to the idiosyncrasies of their manager. 20% was noise, and then the remaining 20% was the person's actual performance. So manager reviews they're not just broken, they're actually like systemically broken.
Well, so is it any wonder that employees don't know whether they're doing a good job or not?
That's right. I mean, there's an old adage that as an employee, when I get a new manager, I'm on a PIP, which is to say that when you get a new manager, you have a new set of expectations, you have a new personality, and you have a new constituent, a new stakeholder who may operate very differently from the last one. And so you have to sort of prove yourself again. But you might say, well, that's not really how good performance management should work, right? I didn't change. my management changed. And that happens all the time, especially when companies are growing quickly.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm curious how, as you look at some of the data and start to think about, I'm sure you're already using AI in some of your technology and generative AI. How are you seeing that have an impact on this process?
So I think AI has a really important role to play. What I would say is the most transformative technology in performance reviews going forward is a methodology called organizational network analysis, or ONA. So what ONA says is, because we work in networks, right, because my stakeholders are broad, they cross functions, they cross geographies, it's not just one manager anymore, that those opinions, those evaluations should actually be taken into account. And so this is how it actually might play out. And it's very different from a 360 where I'm picking 2 or 3 peer reviewers. I'll tell you why. If you were to run a performance review using organizational network analysis, some of the questions that an employee might answer, right, instead of spending an entire performance cycle defending their own contributions, the questions I might answer might be things like, hey, who did you go to for help and advice this quarter? Right? Or who really energizes you at work? Or who are you seeing making an outstanding contribution? And so when we work with our customers, those are the kinds of questions that we want their employees answering, because what will often happen is, hey, if I say that I go to Teri for help and advice, we're going to ask the question, well, what did you go to Teri for help and advice about? And I might say, well, the latest HR trends, right? She knows them and she's the expert. What we also will find is a half dozen other people will say the same thing. And now we can very quickly say, oh, we have a subject matter expert on the latest HR trends. It's Teri. And so it's a great way to map out the expertise, the influence, the contributions across an organization in a way that's not completely manager-centric, that reflects the way we actually get things done in these networks.
And how are you seeing that play out in terms of the results of the performance review process?
Yeah, so one of the most interesting things that we didn't expect to see, but we just saw it organically, was the way that talent actually distributes in an organization. So every performance review I've ever run, we get this sort of bell curve of manager ratings. And if you really look at the history of it, it's really rooted in an era, that bell curve is really rooted in an era where work was more solitary, it was more repetitive, it wasn't as creative. When we run performance cycles, what we typically get, especially if we ask those questions about who do you see making an outstanding contribution, for example, what we see from that is actually a power law or an 80-20 distribution, which is to say that in every organization, there's a relatively small percentage of employees driving outsized impact. And this is pretty well known in the research, but the way I would sort of gut check it is, my guess, if you think about the people you work with or who you've worked with in the past, is that out of every 8 to 10 of them, there are probably 1 or 2 who are so amazing that you just wish you could clone them. Now, that's the power law effect of talent. That's what happens when you get people working together collaboratively. There are always going to be 1 or 2 standouts out of maybe every 8 to 10 employees. And we can tell with a lot of precision who those people are. And then the challenge is, okay, these are the people who are really key, who I can't afford to lose. Now, how do I go and retain them?
How often are you going through this process? So in this ONA model, is this regular check-ins? Are we doing sort of continuous feedback? I realize we're connecting with and sort of doing a little bit of a 360. Obviously, it sounds different than a 360, but sort of how often is that feedback coming in? And when you look at that data, is it relevant? Is it current and something that you could react to at any point in time?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of our customers actually do these questions quarterly. And the reason they do it quarterly is because it only takes 10 or 12 minutes to actually answer those questions. I mean, imagine doing a performance review in 10 minutes, right? It's unheard of. And they can do the whole thing start to finish in about a week. So most of our customers do it quarterly. And what that gives leadership is obviously a very good view into who is driving impact, who maybe needs support. But what it gives the employee and their manager is a really good data-driven foundation to have a good performance conversation that's based on not just my opinion as the manager, but based on everybody's opinion. And so now we can actually start to say, hey, based on this quarter, or maybe you're 3 months into a job, or maybe you're 6 months or 12 months, what we can actually say is this employee developing as a source of help and advice, a source of energy, a source of impact. We see those things correlate with tenure. Is this person developing at the rate that we expect an employee to develop doing their job? And that's a whole new way to think about a performance conversation, because now I can actually bring a data-driven perspective into it that doesn't rely on me knowing everything or having complete visibility as the manager, which of course I don't.
Right. Who initiates that process then under this model? Is it the manager? Is it the individual?
So most of our customers actually do this company-wide. Okay. So HR, along with leadership, is essentially kicking this off at the end of every quarter. And that allows them to collect this data, to have really good performance conversations, to make changes or course corrections. Now, it doesn't replace the need for continuous feedback, right? That has to happen every day. Performance management is an everyday practice. I think of it a little bit like maybe fitness. So I go to the gym every day. I stick to my diet. I try to make good choices in the moment. But once a quarter, this is true, by the way, once a quarter, I get in my car, I drive down to San Carlos, and I do a body composition scan. And it's a little X-ray that tells me my body fat percentage, bone density. It's the measurement that tells me, are the things that I'm doing every day keeping me on track, or do I have to course correct? And that's the value of doing something like this quarterly, where it's about the continuous feedback. It's about the everyday practice, but it's also, let's actually do a temperature check here and get some data and see if we're on track.
That's a great analogy. I think it's that check-in, like, are we doing it right? Are we getting it right? Is it working? And I think in a traditional performance plan, performance review process, we're kind of just looking at, what have you done for me lately?
Right. And I think that when you talk about an annual performance review, I think it gets even worse, because you're looking back at a year period, so tons of recency bias. But then, and we haven't even talked about calibration yet, we're going to go through a calibration process where the company may come back and say, look, we have too many people exceeding expectations and we don't have enough promotions. So we're going to calibrate someone who could be doing really well. We're going to calibrate them down to meeting expectations. And then you start to wonder, well, why the heck am I even here, right? If my own performance isn't the primary input into my performance rating, what's the point of this?
And then it's a political fight with your peers, your other managers and peers, to try to get the people on your team that you think should be promoted into those slots, right?
And that's maybe the scariest part, I think, of all of this, which is my destiny as an employee, my advancement, my opportunities, my promotion opportunities. They're somewhat dependent on my own performance, but they're much more dependent on my manager's ability to advocate and to influence on my behalf relative to all the other managers who are trying to do the same thing. And what you start to get to is, gosh, we did a clean sheet of paper. If we reimagined performance reviews from the ground up, you'd probably say, well, the most important factor should be my contribution and not my manager's ability to influence. It should be what I'm actually capable of and what I've contributed.
Exactly.
And that's where we get excited about organizational network analysis, because it takes the focus off the manager's ability to advocate and to influence, and it puts the focus on the employee's ability to be a source of help and advice, or source of energy, or source of impact to the people around them.
Yeah. Well, and especially since that the practice of performance ratings in general has long been to determine what your salary increases will be as well, right? And your ability to spend those comp dollars every year is relied on that bell curve that you talked about. And so it really does come back to, what was my manager able to do for me, right? Not what was my contribution, and did I get rewarded for that contribution?
And that's exactly right. And it's, what was I able to present to my manager about my contribution? So there's a self-advocacy component to this as well. And what we know from a lot of research is not every group of people is conditioned to self-advocate the same way. And that's where things like bias really come into play here. If you read the news, you can read a lot about the quiet quitters, but what you won't read about are the quiet contributors, who are the people who do a ton of work behind the scenes. They're sort of the glue that holds the organization together. And they may not be the people who speak up in every meeting. And they may not be the people who manage up terribly well, but they're doing so much behind the scenes. And I think, again, clean sheet of paper, a really good performance management process and good performance measurement would spot those people and actually elevate them and say, these are important people to the organization, even if not the best self-advocates.
Yeah, that can be a challenge. And I know there's a lot of people that find that very difficult to talk about themselves and what they've done and what they've done well, right? They want people to see it. They don't want to have to say it. And so if nobody's seeing it, that level of advocacy is not going to be there for you. And so there are some things I think that still at the individual level, regardless of how this process goes, you as an individual need to take some responsibility for making sure that people know what you're doing and what you've done and what you've accomplished. And I think that just comes with time and mirroring others and learning from mentors.
Absolutely. And I think the question starts to become, who should see? If all of the decision-making is vested in one person, the manager, well, it's up to the manager to see everything that this employee is contributing. But, again, because we work in networks, the manager can't ever get a full picture. And that's where organizational network analysis becomes so important, because it's not just, if I want to game a system, right, that is completely manager driven, all I've got to do is manage up. I don't care about what everybody else thinks about me. All I need to do is make sure that my manager sees that I'm doing great. But in a system like org network analysis or ONA, if you want to game that system, what I would say is the easiest way to do it is be a source of help and advice to the people around you. Be a source of energy to them, motivate them, be a source of impact. And by the way, don't be a jerk, because we ask a question like that as well. So it's like, great, let's game that system, right? The incentives are aligned.
Right. You can certainly game that system by doing a great job and delivering on your promises, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Can you talk about an example? Do you have a client example that might be a good one to talk about where you've seen this done really well and what some of the outcomes were?
Yeah, I have a couple. So one, actually, I just heard this a couple of weeks ago. So one of our customers is about a 200-person software company. And they joined us as a customer, I think in 21 or 22. But anyway, they did a performance cycle with organizational network analysis. And out of those 200 people, they identified 27 people who were top subject matter experts, energizers and influencers, and top contributors. And again, this is through ONA. There were no managers as part of this exercise, completely driven by the network.
Okay.
So they identified 27 people out of 200, and they embarked on a campaign to retain 100% of those top contributors. And so they did things like outsize pay increases, they did equity refresh grants, they did stay interviews. So every single one of those employees had a sit down with the founder. And over a 12-month period, they retained 100% of those 27 key employees. But what they also found that they didn't expect was that the overall attrition in the company went from mid 20% to under 10%. So the overall attrition dropped by more than half. And the reason that happens is if you lose somebody who you go to for help, or if you lose somebody who really energizes you at work, it causes you to question, right, whether this is the right place. And by keeping those key employees in place, by retaining them, they retained everybody else as well. And that was actually an unexpected outcome. But we have a couple of examples of this from our customers where it's really about identifying and retaining that key talent.
That would be huge. I think anybody would be interested in how to make that move, right? How do we build that level of people wanting to stay with the company, right? So their loyalty to the organization. And people don't just, they say people largely leave because of their manager. But the reality is, I think it's more the people they work with as well, who they rely on, who they see as mentors, who they see as there's always those influencers in the organization that aren't managers, right? But they influence my decision as an employee in that department or in that part of the organization. And so I see where that could be significant. That's a really interesting outcome.
Absolutely. Yeah. We have customers practice, I would call it talent hygiene in a lot of different ways. I have another customer that about 140 person remote software company. I was talking to their head of HR. She said, last year, out of 140 people, we exited 25 of them. They have a high bar for performance. She said, we exited 25, but with the money that we saved, we were able to promote 39 people who were top performers. We were able to move the entire company to a universal salary scale. So you can earn a great living, even if you're not able to live in the United States or Europe. And by the way, if you look up this company on Glassdoor, they have a 4.8 out of 5 rating. Right? So they're doing something right. And I think they rely heavily on the organizational network analysis data. And what I think is so great about using that data when it comes to especially PIPs and promotions is that when you make those decisions based on the network's point of view, nobody's ever surprised. I think that when you go through a really good promotion cycle, no one should be surprised that Mary was promoted, but Bob wasn't. Because if you ask people who's really making a difference, right? Or who is that person who you always go to for help, they know. I think that in a bad promotion cycle, that's where you see people get passed over who really deserve that promotion, but maybe their manager didn't have the influence. In a really good promo cycle, nobody's surprised. I would say the same is true for PIPs.
Yeah. And I mean, those dollars that get spent during that process are critical. So how often do those dollars get spent on people because we just feel like we have to give everybody something, right? Instead of focusing on where people are delivering and actually giving people a real incentive to make those same levels of contributions.
Absolutely. And we're in an environment, especially if you're a tech company, we went through a probably 2 quarters of really intense rifts in tech. And every so often I read about companies trying to save money. And it's like 70 to 80% of all the money it takes to run your company is payroll and benefits. It's just people. Like you can cut the cafeteria budget all you want. It won't make a difference. It's really the talent management. That's actually the way to drive results. It's about people at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And this is the kind of thing as people continue to look at, because we've got a number of clients right now who are sort of relooking at their performance evaluation process and have either moved away from ratings or changed their process significantly and are, like I said earlier, seeing that pendulum swing back the other way. We need to do something different because this isn't quite working. Productivity's been down. Everybody's working remotely. Right. I don't have that line of sight. What do I do? And so we're starting to see that become a hot topic again in the market because you've got to get your arms around the performance and talent management side of this and how you spend your budget if you want to be successful. And there are true outcomes that can come from that.
Yeah, I would say if a company were looking at their performance process right now, I would probably identify two pitfalls. So one would be if you're moving to continuous feedback with no measurement, I would say you're in trouble because continuous feedback is great. It's great for development, but sometimes, in fact, it's not even sometimes, all the time, we've got to make hard decisions. Who are we going to promote? Which means who are we not going to promote? So continuous feedback without measurement, that's a problem. But measurement that's completely vested in the manager having total visibility, that's a problem too. And when we think of performance measurement, that's the model that we default to, is the one where the manager is going to assign a rating. We assume that the manager knows exactly what's going on. The reality is they don't. We assume the manager is going to be unbiased. The reality is they aren't. And so we put organizational network analysis out there as kind of a third option. And I would say that good performance measurement is the heart of really good performance management. We just need a new way to actually measure who's making an impact in our organizations.
Right. So I know that organizational network analysis sounds like something that is high on your list of things to do. But short of that, what's one thing you can leave the audience with that will help them get to work on this problem? Something actionable, something that they could do today just to start to either identify what they need to do next or put them on a path to improving their performance reviews.
Yeah. So I would say a couple things. So org network analysis is great. You don't have to do it with Confirm. You could do it with, honestly, you could take the system that you have today and ask one question, like, who do you go to for help and advice? And that's doing organizational network analysis. So you'll actually get your subject matter experts just from asking that question. So I would say that's one quick actionable thing that you could do in your next performance cycle, regardless really of what system you use.
I love that. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, simple question. There's a lot happening around AI that we're really excited about. We haven't touched on that yet, but that's a huge area for HR to lean into. But I would say if you don't use a vendor like Confirm, do the poor man's O&A. Ask who do you go to for help and advice, or ask who do you see making an outstanding impact?
Yeah, no, that's a great, and that's easy, right? I mean, that's
totally easy.
That's totally easy. Anybody can incorporate that into their process without a lot of additional work.
That's right.
Is there some last minute information you want to leave us on AI? I know we didn't get a lot of chance to talk about that, and that is a huge topic right now. We're going to be doing some additional podcasts just focused on AI in general, but I always like to kind of ask that question. Is there anything big sitting there in your particular area that you feel strongly about that AI is going to blow the doors off of for you?
Yeah, gosh, I can give you a couple examples that I'm really excited about. So we already use AI we use GPT-4 in manager reviews. So we can do things like summarize the manager's review using GPT-4. Something that we have coming a week or two that we're really excited about is the ability to summarize engagement surveys. So if I ask a question like, what can we do to improve your experience at Acme, right? Give us a paragraph of text. Well, you might get 1,000 paragraphs across 1,000 employees. And then HR is going to spend a week sifting through all those responses and trying to categorize them into themes and things like that. Well, what we found is AI can do that in just a couple seconds. And then you can actually cut the data in ways that you can't cut it if you're doing it manually. So we might ask the question, well, what can we do to improve? What are the top 5 ways that we can improve the workplace experience for the engineering team or for people at a particular location or for people in our Houston office, right? And AI gives us the ability to do those summaries and pull the themes out immediately with no work at all from HR. So pretty excited about that as well.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of thing people are waiting for. But at the same time, I know a lot of people are nervous about AI and how they're going to use it and whether it's secure and all those kinds of things. So that's still swirling around in a lot of people's minds. And I know HR has been a little bit more reluctant to dive into the deep end, if you will, from an AI perspective. But I think that's changing. And I think
I think there's a healthy amount of it too. I mean, AI is not, these tools they're very confident when they present an answer to you. Right?
Yes.
They're very confident, but they're not always right. And we've seen examples in our testing where unless you're really careful about what you're asking the AI to do, it can go off the rails.
Yeah.
And we've had to find those edge cases.
I think the trust but verify is still a valid way to approach things, even with AI.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, we'll be talking about more of this kind of thing, particularly, I think, as this whole performance review process evolves over the next 1 to 3 years. And we also have a group called Raising the Bar on HR on LinkedIn. So I think we'll be talking about this a bit more on that group and just getting the conversation going and helping people with some of those opportunities. Thank you, Josh, for joining me today. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
Where can people find you on social?
Yeah. So you can look me up on LinkedIn, Josh Merrill. You can also just go to our website, confirm.com.
Awesome. Well, I also want to thank our producers, Brand Method Media Group, and our marketing team, Lisa and Zoe. They do a fantastic job. And thank you for tuning in. That's it for this episode of HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. And if you have a minute, leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. You can also drop us a line or schedule a chat on the website. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks.